This is episode number 201. Gary Vaynerchuk. Didn't like him, read his latest book. Now I like him a little bit more. Got the big takeaways from it. That's coming up.
This is the Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. Rise above the noise. Expand your audience. Deliver impact. Here's your host, David Hooper.
There are some things that are way better on paper than they are in reality. And one of those things, for me, was owning a house with a flat roof. Looked great, had a rooftop deck, overlooked the city. Super cool when it wasn't raining. But when it was raining, the roof would leak and leak and leak. And I went through roofer after roofer trying to find somebody who could handle this type of repair. But not a lot of people will actually touch a flat roof. It's technically a commercial product. So I had to go to a commercial roofing specialist. And they sent a guy over. His name was Rick James. But the dude who actually showed up, completely different from the Rick James that we all know and love. This dude was like kind of actually the opposite of Rick James. Shows up in a white pickup truck with an American flag and an eagle with a tear running down its eye. And I'm thinking, what a bitch it must be to have a very popular name, a common name that if somebody were searching for you, there's either a celebrity with your name or if the name's so common like John Smith, nobody can find you if they're searching for you. David Hooper, believe it or not, is one of those names. It's not as common as something like Rick James or John Smith, but in Europe, it's a very common name. And one of the very cool things about having a common name is sometimes you luck out and something cool happens. This just happened to me. I was looking on goodreads.com. I was actually looking for my account because I've got some books on there that I've written. And when I searched for David Hooper, my books didn't come up, but some guy has written a trilogy and the main character, David Hooper. For fans of Jim Butcher and Kevin Hearn comes an action-packed new urban fantasy series featuring a tough, bleakly funny, down on his luck oil rig worker with an unlikely destiny as a monster slayer and savior of the planet. Killing a 7-foot-tall tattooed demon has transformed the overweight, balding safety manager into something else entirely. A foul-mouthed, beer-loving monster slayer and humanity's least worthy champion. So I made this guy a trailer. Let me get my radio voice.
David Hooper has a hangover from hell, a horrible ex-wife, and the fangs of the IRS deep in his side. The last thing he needs is an explosion at work. And despite the news reports, David knows terrorists aren't to blame. When he wakes up in a hospital bed guarded by Navy SEALs, he realizes this is more than just a dream. This nightmare is way weirder.
The book is called Emergence, Dave versus the Monsters. John Birmingham is the author, and if you're interested in reading about the adventures of David Hooper, I'll have links in the episode notes, redpodcast.com/201. This is the Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. If you're a blogger, podcaster, speaker, marketer, nonfiction author, or entrepreneur, this is the podcast for you. I talk about book publishing, podcasting, speaking, and other marketing elements of your business that you must master to grow and engage your audience. That's what RED stands for: reach, expand, and develop your audience. I show you how to take your idea, take your work, make a name for yourself, and make money. Like any homeowner, I've got a lot of people that come to my house to do work for me. One of the guys that I see on a regular basis is my lawn guy. Just started up. He does lawns with a real mower, like one of those old school push mowers, no electricity. I like it because there's no noise. And after being 20 years in the music business, I like things with no noise, no emissions, no pollution. I live in an urban neighborhood. My yard is fairly small. It's perfect for this kind of thing. It's wonderful to be able to hire somebody to do the work that either you don't want to do or to hire somebody who can do the work better than you can do. One of the issues that I face when I hire people to come to my house, though, is am I going to be here? Will I be in the middle of a project? How are they going to get paid? Because a lot of these guys, not very advanced when it comes to how they collect money. They're either collecting cash or they collect checks. I'm going to get this guy hooked up on FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the way to invoice. He could collect money so easily, just like you can collect money so easily using FreshBooks invoicing system. It takes about 30 seconds. An email with the invoice goes out directly to your client. The client can see it. You can see when they've seen it, so there are no more excuses like, hey, didn't get the invoice. You know when they've seen it. And here's the great part. They can actually pay right there on the invoice, click a button, type in their credit card information, and you get paid instantly. FreshBooks, it's cheaper than you think. In fact, FreshBooks right now is offering a month of unrestricted use to all Red Podcast listeners, totally free right now. And you don't even need a credit card for the trial. To claim your free month, go to freshbooks.com/red and enter red in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Let's talk about a man with a not-so-common name, Gary Vaynerchuk. You know the name. Gary V is sometimes how he's known. He's all over Twitter, all over Facebook. I can't get on Facebook these days without seeing a ton of Gary V videos. When it comes to entrepreneurs, they love Gary V. I just listened to his audiobook. It's called Ask Gary V. A friend of mine sent it to me as a gift because I wasn't a big fan. I'm more of a fan now. And I want to talk about some of the biggest lessons, the biggest takeaways that I took from the Ask Gary V audiobook. It's quite long. Audiobook is almost 12 hours. So if you've got that kind of time, I like to listen to it while I'm in the gym, while I'm lifting weights, while I'm on the bike, while I'm on an elliptical machine. If you've got that kind of time, if you've got a commute, you can knock it out pretty quickly. The biggest thing that I appreciate about Gary V is that he's actually done it. He's not just a guy who's talking about social media. He's not just a guy who's running his mouth. This is a guy who has actually had success in business. He learned social media on the job, working in that business, and that's why I feel that he's qualified. There's a saying that says, don't trust a warrior who's never been to war. We got a lot of warriors out there that have never been to war. They remind me of what we call lumbersexual. You familiar with that term? Look it up if you're not. Lumbersexual, where you see these guys that are dressed like lumberjacks, but they've never swung an axe, never been in the woods. They just like the fashion element of that type of uniform. Not Gary V. Gary's run a real business. He's not perfect. It's one of the reasons I'm calling this episode The Cult of Gary Vaynerchuk. A lot of people think that he's perfect, but if you go to the reviews of his company, it's called VaynerMedia, and you look him up on Glassdoor.com, you will see that he is not perfect. He's got hundreds of employees, and it's very tough to have a company that's that large. But that's what I'm talking about. Don't trust a warrior who's never been to war. He's not perfect. He's got some nicks, some scratches, but he's still worth listening to. There's lots of hype around him, but at least he's done it. And he's actually done it twice. He's had success with Wine Library TV. He's had success with his current company, VaynerMedia. And he's also had success becoming an influencer in the social media marketing space. That's why I'm talking about him on this episode of Red. Again, the book is called Ask Gary V. It's based on a web series that he's done. And because of that, the book is really all over the place. Some of it I found extremely crazy, but as an influencer yourself, you're going to learn from this. For example, people ask him about his family 1 minute. People ask him about the music that he listens to. To me, that really has nothing to do with marketing. It has nothing to do with why I would listen to Gary V. But you've probably experienced this yourself, is as you influence more and more people, as you develop this reputation as an expert, people start coming out of the woodwork with questions about things that are not related to what it is that you talk about. They just want to know how you live. There's some good info in this book. That's what I'm going to talk about. There's some information in this book that I don't agree with. For example, he had an entire section about musicians, about how musicians can make a living in the music business. Well, Gary V doesn't know that industry. He's telling people to get on Twitter, get on Snapchat. It's a little more complicated than that. When you're listening to him, I think it's advisable that you take what he says with a grain of salt, but take the good. There's enough good there that it's worth the investment. Why did I like it so much? Because I agreed with so much of it. I think it's because I'm a warrior too. I've done it. I worked to market several different industries over the years. I've got the scratches, got the scars, got the dings in my armor, and that's something that I can relate to. Here's the first big idea that I agree with: wide versus deep. Talked about logging into Facebook and seeing Gary Vaynerchuk everywhere. That's because I've got a lot of friends that are entrepreneurs. Gary Vaynerchuk is not a household name. If you mentioned him to just the average guy on the street, they're not going to have any idea who he is. He's not like Donald Trump, maybe Mark Cuban, the guys on Shark Tank, that is taking his celebrity out of the business world and expanded into the general public. But he is big among entrepreneurs and people online, so you probably know who he is. That celebrity that he has, that niched celebrity, it was enough to get him a 10-book deal. These kind of deals vary. A lot of times when you get a 10-book deal, it's the option of the publisher, whether they want to release that book. In other words, you write a book, you give it to the publisher, they have the option of whether or not to release it. So you could do that a maximum of 10 times before you get let out of your book deal. It's not up to you whether they release it, it's up to them. I would imagine, though, Gary Vaynerchuk, because of the success he's had with his book deal, he's been able to renegotiate the initial deal. He was well known when he got that initial deal that he might have negotiated something like a guaranteed release, like guaranteed promotion. 10-book deal, not always what it seems, but the fact that he got one means that somebody likes what he's doing, and certainly he's done very well. I think this is the 5th book that he's released. One of the things that he talks about that I think is super important, in fact, I actually wrote a book about this subject, gratitude. So many times we see entrepreneurs, they're what I call hungry ghosts, and I've seen this a lot working with celebrities and entertainers. And hungry ghost is basically a concept that no matter how much you feed them, it goes straight through them. There are no walls to contain anything of what they're receiving. This means good press. This means adoring fans. This means sales. This means recognition. This means authority and influence. Money's never enough. Fame is never enough. And I think the solution is gratitude. And I'll give Gary that with all the success that he's had. He still seems, for the most part, as much as an entrepreneur who's in front of the camera all the time and getting this kind of recognition can be, pretty grounded, pretty humble. You can maintain humility in your business. You'll have a better life. You'll be more fun to work with. You're going to have better relationships outside of business. It's a great quality to have. Third big idea, do the work yourself. There are some things that you cannot outsource. You can't outsource a personal relationship. So many people these days, they're trying to hack things. Another big guy that you might have read, Tim Ferriss, 4-Hour Work Week, 4-Hour Chef, these other books that he's written. They're all about taking a process and trying to skip steps while still achieving the same results. I have never found that you can skip steps and still achieve the same results. You might achieve most of the results. You'll certainly achieve some of the results. But many times, if you don't have 100%, you might as well have 0. For example, right now, my book that I've been working on for the last couple of years, it's 90% done. But 90% done, that's 0 because I can't release a book that's 90% done. It has to be 100% done. A lot of things are like that. So many people trying to hack things. It's the equivalent of outsourcing your childcare to a kid in front of an iPad, in front of a TV. It's like, yeah, it kind of seems like it's childcare, but the end result is not going to be nearly as good as actually engaging the kid, spending time with the kid. I'm not saying that you shouldn't hack things, but you need to know that it is not the same. Sometimes you've got to do the work, and some things you should not outsource. For example, this podcast episode, I edited it. I could easily hire that out. My radio show, I don't edit it. I've got professional editors that come in. They handle everything. But by editing this podcast and doing the work myself, it gets me more clear on the idea. It makes me a better host, and I'm better the next time. If I never had to deal with it, if I just spoke into a mic for an hour, because that's basically what I do. I get into the studio and I talk. This episode, if you look at the raw tape, it's probably going to be about 45 minutes. I'm going to chop it down, take about 20, 25 minutes off of it. That is how much editing there is. And if I didn't have to deal with that, I'm not going to learn the lessons that come from dealing with that. Do the work yourself. Gary talks a lot about that. Stop trying to outsource everything. Stop trying to hack everything. Do the work yourself. Take the lessons from it and get better. Attention is commodity. This is big. Filters are gone. There are more and more things being released into the world because it's easier to create things. It's easier to create video. It's easier to create audio. When I started in radio, 1991, I was a freshman in college. I was working at a station doing production. We would record onto a reel-to-reel tape. When something was said that you didn't want to get aired, you would take that piece of tape and literally cut a chunk out of it, cut the word out using a razor blade, and remove a physical piece of tape from the reel. You tape the tape back up, and then you go on like that. Editing a show like this with my kind of skills, where I've got to talk 45 minutes to get 20 minutes worth of content, that would have taken forever. And because we don't have to do that anymore, because we've got digital editing, we've got cheap video recorders, we've got computers that can distribute everything we produce all around the world without having to manufacture it, put it on a truck, get it to a retail outlet, and distribute a physical copy of it. There's a lot of stuff for people to go through. They are inundated with noise. Some of it's good content, some of it's not. The bottom line is that there are too few filters and there is too much junk online because of it. How will you compete with that? I'll tell you one way that Facebook is competing with that is they are hiring celebrities for Facebook Live. Celebrity is one way that you compete with that. That's why this podcast exists, is to make you a celebrity in your niche. This is what Gary Vaynerchuk has done. He's the celebrity within his niche. There are a lot of people talking about social media, many of them saying the exact same thing that Gary Vaynerchuk is saying. But because of his personality, he draws people in. People are more likely to listen to him, and the thing compounds on himself. That's what this podcast is about, because like he says, attention is the real commodity. I've got to respect Gary Vaynerchuk for starting at the bottom of the wine company. His father owned a wine company. If you don't know the story, he started at the bottom, sweeping the floors, unpacking boxes, doing the shipping. Like I said, people don't trust a warrior who hasn't been to war, and that is war. That's how you learn the business. In a past life, when I was just getting my company off the ground, wasn't able to work full-time at my company because all the money that I was making was going back into it, and I needed more money. I took a job as a UPS guy. If you're not familiar with the way UPS works, everybody starts in the hub. You get to see how the packages are sorted. Fortunately, I went to a college that had a hub in town. I'd already had that experience, so I was able to get a job actually delivering packages. I had a route. It was a shopping mall in Columbus, Ohio. Pull up in a huge truck, unload a huge truck in the shopping mall, go around to the stores once again. If they had something for me to pick up, I would take it back to the truck, and I would fill it right back up. The guys that I worked with, they went on to become executives at UPS. And the reason that they do this is because the people at the top level understand where the people at the bottom level are coming from. Now, this is the very best thing that you can do to get business. When you are the warrior who has been to war, when you're that guy that is working the bottom levels of marketing, the bottom levels of speaking, the bottom levels of whatever it is that you do, book production, videos, however you're influencing people. When you've worked all those levels, when you've edited your own podcast, for example, you've got more empathy for the editors that you hire. You've got more rapport for the editors that you hire. You've got more credibility with the editors that you hire. And you've got more knowledge of the process, so you're able to hire better. You can spot those fakes. You can spot the equivalent of the lumbersexual, a guy who looks like he's a lumberjack, who has never been in the forest, never swung an axe. One of the big ideas that I disagree with Gary about, and I've seen this come up a lot, it may be something that you agree with, and that's the idea of legacy. Lewis Howes has written about legacy. That was in the title of his book. Michael Hyatt talks about legacy. And legacy is basically, when you're dead, what do people think about you? Here's my philosophy on it. When you do your work, legacy takes care of itself. Just do your work. You don't need to worry about what people think about when you're dead. You'll be worried about other things. You'll be dead. It doesn't matter. And keep that in mind. You are dead. You're not there to control anything. We cannot control our legacy. We can't control who shows up for our funeral. Just keep your head down, do your work. The legacy, whatever the that is, that will take care of itself. This is one of the big contradictions of the book, Ask Gary V. He talks about don't live your life for others. But I've got to wonder about a guy who seems to be on YouTube all the time, on the radio all the time, on a podcast all the time, always promoting himself, always has his face in front of a camera behind the mic. Isn't that living your life for others? I was talking to a friend of mine, and he talked about he wanted to go on vacation. He wanted to have a vacation sponsored by a company. It's basically going on tour. He would promote that company through videos, through social media posts, and hopefully get that company business since they would be paying for the vacation. He said, yeah, it's like a free vacation. No, it's not free. It's not free if you have to think about honoring the needs of a sponsor. My vacation is my off time. There is no social media. There is no podcast. There is no internet. When I go on vacation with my wife, that's our time. We're not taking photos for anybody else. I'm there to connect with my wife. I'm there to connect with myself. It's not a free vacation if you're working for somebody else, and it's not a vacation if you're working at all. This is one of the aspects that I brought from the music industry, because the way that we do things is we've got our time on stage when we're performing, and then there's the time off stage. And certainly, there have been musicians that have screwed this up. They play the rock star on stage, they play the rock star off stage. Those musicians are dead. Those musicians are drug addicted. Those musicians have domestic issues. The rest of us, though, that can keep things separate, you get on stage, you play a part, give people a show, then you go home and you're a normal person. That used to be easier than it is now. And the reason that it's not so easy now is the same reason that we've got to deal with so much junk content on the internet. It's because social media is everywhere. It's easy to make videos. We feel like we need to be connected to our phones, giving Facebook statuses, Twitter updates. We do not. There's a time to be on stage. There's a time to be off stage. Consider it. Otherwise, you're working all the time. Final big idea from Ask Gary V. He says that failure is good. This is another lesson that I bring from the entertainment business, and that is that if you're around long enough, you will have downtime. Nobody is at the top of his game if he's around long enough. If you're around for 10, 20, 30 years, there may be months, there may be years when, as we say, nobody would piss on your leg if you were on fire. Nobody cares. But if you keep showing up, eventually people see that you keep showing up. And that, strangely enough, is why I'm a Gary Vaynerchuk fan. After listening to this audiobook, the guy keeps showing up. For this many people, what I call the cult of Gary Vaynerchuk, to be that into him, he must have something of value. Don't have to agree with all of it. I certainly do not. There are parts of this book not worth listening to, in my opinion. But there are enough good things about this book that is absolutely worth going through. I've got a link if you want a free copy of the audiobook, free with an Audible trial. Just go to redpodcast.com/201. It is there in the episode notes. Hey, next episode. Speaking of books, I've got a book update for you. What's going on with my book? Just to quickly bring you up to speed, I handed the manuscript to my editor, 137,500 words, and she told me
it's just a big jumbled mess.
A lot has changed in the last few weeks. I've got a deadline, got a release date. I'm going to update you on that and let you know a little bit more about the book writing process, the book release process. Hopefully give you some important info, some important lessons that you can use to publish and market your book. If you've got questions or comments, reach out to me. @David Hooper on Twitter is the best way to get me. Before I go, a quick update on my one-on-one coaching offer. I've gotten a lot of interest. A lot of people filled out the form at redpodcast.com/coaching. If you're interested, I need you to fill out the form now. I'm going through all those, getting back with the people for a free one-on-one session to see if I'm a match for you. I'm going to shut this form down within the next couple of days. redpodcast.com/coaching if you want to fill out the form to see if we're a match to work together. More information on that, redpodcast.com/pitch. you want to hear more about what this coaching opportunity is about. Thank you so much for listening to Red Podcast. It means the world to me. Thanks for spreading the word about Red Podcast and helping to expand the Red Podcast community. I'll see you next time on the next episode of Red Podcast.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. Never miss an episode. Subscribe now with your iPhone, Android, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.